Hello. So, giving you a bit of a foretaste as to um, the class action argument that's going to be coming ahead. And you might be wondering why I'm saying this when the banks might know it, but I've already put in heads of argument when I say I'm going to say this. Um, so, what should the bank have done? It's part of a delict, and I think we've talked about that in the past. Elements of a delict. Um, a delict is a harm, a wrong. It's different from breach of contract. They're kind of the two main things in civil law. When you run into somebody's wall, you've committed a delict. You might not have intended to damage their wall, but you did. So, did you do something wrong? Was it reasonable for you to avoid crashing into that wall? These are the kind of questions you ask in delict. So what should the banks have done, right? So they had this law on the books in the Rules of Court, Rule 46, unlike I think anywhere else in the world, I've never seen it, where it said up to 2017 that the banks could not put a reserve price on the sheriff's auction. So I'm sure it's going to be part of their I don't think I'm giving anything away to say that they're going to say, well, that's what the law said. We were allowed to do that. Unfortunately, we don't think so. When you act in terms of the law, you have to do so reasonably. You have to do so like a reasonable man would do. And it's not reasonable. Maybe the first time they ever sold a house, which was before the Constitution, but the first time they sold a house for 100 Rand because the sheriff auction system said 100 Rand, that would have been, we could have allowed them one. But after that, you would expect a reasonable person to say, this isn't okay. How can we sell somebody's house that's worth 200,000 Rand, let's say, for 100 Rand? Or R1,000,000 for 200,000 Rand? Is that reasonable? I don't think anybody in the world thinks that's reasonable. Certainly every other country in the world has got laws to stop banks doing that. But even if we don't have a law that says you're not allowed to do that you're not allowed to sell property for less than a reasonable price, and that's exactly the legislation that there are in other countries, it's reasonable to expect our banks to check it out and say, something wrong with this. So first of all, to go to their local remedies. So banks know that there's such people as estate agents out there, and if the sheriff's auction is so bad that it's selling people's houses for that little, then they should approach their client and say, look guys, if we put your property on sheriff's auction, we've got a judgment now, we can do that. We can put a reserve price on it. Why don't you and me agree, and we'll sell it through an estate agent for a proper price. How's that? Now, the thing is that banks did not, in general, I've never heard of it happening. They do sell it before. This is that makes it even worse. Before the judgment, they sell it through estate agents. You can go through Help You Sell or whatever, and it's sold through an estate agent. But once they've got a judgment, they in general don't do that. I've never heard of them doing that. There may be individual cases, but certainly if there were, then they'd be able to plead them. But for the 99% of cases where they haven't done that, to me, it's not reasonable to just keep going again and again and again. And if you look at delict cases, if you look at cases where harm's done by a doctor maybe to a patient, by a municipality, by the police to people who, when they've released people out on bail which they shouldn't have, they do it once. They only do it once. And you never see the same case repeating itself. Our banks did 100,000 times. Really? I mean, after 3 or 4, you'd think, maybe after 10, they'd be like, oh, right, this isn't okay. So there's always two theories about this. One is that the banks are just incorrigibly careless. They don't care. And that's what makes them liable. The other idea is that the banks themselves are selling these houses, taking them for themselves, for their own staff, for relatives, etc. I have no evidence for this because it'd be very difficult. It's very difficult to prove. It's all behind closed doors, etc. It's very difficult to prove. But I do think there should be an investigation to see if that's the case. It might not be the case. They might just be careless. But these are the two theories. Either way, they would be guilty in dealing, because a reasonable person would not just keep selling people's properties for very, very little when that's not the way of the rest of the world. So this is a big organization, a bank. You know, they've got thousands and thousands of employees, thousands and thousands of legal employees. So why didn't they say, okay, let's look at what the rest of the world was doing? Or maybe they did. If they did, why didn't they? They must have had people that were coming from other countries and saying, well, we don't do it that way where we're from. So they must have taken that information, the knowledge that other people didn't abuse their clients as much as they do, and ignored it, or intentionally said, we'd prefer to do it this way. Maybe they thought it would deter other clients from defaulting. Maybe that was their reason. Well, that's not a good reason. That's not what a reasonable person would have done. And then every time that the law was to be improved, some case came and they said, let's say in Cala, where they said, look, why are you selling people's properties when they've already paid off their arrears? And the bank said, no, but they still owed legal costs and this other things. And the Constitutional Court ruled, no. These costs haven't been set. They're just in your mind. You need to go to the taxing master at the master's office and get them set. So if the person's paid off their bond, they're not in arrears at least. The bond doesn't need to be fully paid off, but they're not in arrears. Then the bank can't sell their house, and yet they have. And that's one of the categories, the subcategories of our class action, the subclasses, when the person was not in arrears and they sold off their bond. That's already been set by Ancala. So certainly that one should be authorised, that the bank should have to pay these people back, because the Constitutional Court's already decided that that's wrong. So what else would be reasonable? The Constitutional Court decided in 2005 that the bank has to sell as a last resort. So if it didn't sell as a last resort any time, retrospectively back to the Constitution coming in and going forward as well, when it wasn't a last resort, it's not reasonable. It's not reasonable for the bank to do that. And yet that is the way they've acted. And that is why we're arguing they're liable. And that's what we will argue. And that's what we've put in our heads of argument. So as I was saying, every case like Ancala, they opposed it. When we tried to get a reserve price put in and the old law taken away in 2017-16 with the Rules Board investigating, everyone there was a big meeting at Emperor's Palace, I think it's called, near the airport in Joburg, and everybody said, yes, we should have a reserve price. Yes, we should accept the banks. They said, no, we don't want a reserve price. Why not? Why abuse your clients so much? Not reasonable. Banks in this country are not reasonable. We see so many cases coming into our offices. We say the bank is not being reasonable. There's another one subdivision, right? So you can, sometimes, it's actually not that common, but sometimes you can subdivide a house or a piece of land. The client once, he'd done it even before. He's not got much income now, but he's got a lot of land that he had. And so he said he sold a piece of land, used it to pay off his arrears on his bond. Okay, so he wanted to do the same again, but now it's a piece of land that's already bonded. Before it wasn't bonded, and he's asking ABSA, by far the worst bank, I'm going to name and shame. Can I subdivide and you can have the money, you can have security over it, no chance of it disappearing or anything, you can have it, use it to pay the we'll sell that piece of land, you use it to pay the arrears. No, they won't do it. Is it a last resort for them to be able to sell the whole of the land when there's enough money in a section to subdivide, sell that piece of land, pay it off? It's not reasonable. It's not a last resort. And that's why ABSA is liable in these kind of cases as well. All the banks are liable when they've done that. So without going any further, I'm just saying the banks have to establish that they've acted reasonably, and they haven't.